This is really interesting. The mainstream media hasn't spent much time, if any, covering the case against Stephen Donziger, the lawyer who took on Chevron for the environmental damage and health effects caused by their oil drilling. Now, we may have an idea as to why.
According to Donziger, the New York Times press lawyer, Ted Boutros, is the same person who, quote, has billed Chevron millions to attack, demonize, and lock Donziger up. Human rights attorney Stephen Donziger joins us now to discuss. Stephen, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Can you tell us a little bit more about what you uncovered about this Times
Well, yeah, it's just extraordinary. The Times has been ignoring the story of the Ecuador case by unprecedented for, almost 2 years now. Well, it's been covered by the independent media, you guys, The Nation, The Intercept, European media. And I recently learned that Chevron's main lawyer, Ted Boutros, also represents the New York Times on all of the First Amendment litigation. Boutros is known as a very good First Amendment lawyer, but he really, I think, launders his reputation for that work so he can do the dirty work of the big oil companies like Chevron, a company that is now prosecuting me in its first corporate prosecution after I helped indigenous peoples in Ecuador win the historic pollution judgment against the company. So, one explanation I have as to why the New York Times is ignoring this critically important story of this corporate attack on a human rights lawyer is that its main lawyer, outside lawyer, is the lawyer who's being paid by Chevron to attack me. And the New York Times needs to come clean. This is a major, major conflict of interest.
And there's clearly a pattern of people in power sort of coalescing against you. For people who might not be initiated into the very complicated details of this very complicated case, you are facing allegations of racketeering and bribery. Can you tell us briefly what those allegations are and how you have responded to them?
Sure. Well, just to be clear, I'm a lawyer who helped work with an international team. We helped indigenous peoples, rural communities in Ecuador's Amazon win a $9.5 billion pollution judgment against Chevron. Chevron was found by multiple courts who have deliberately dumped billions of gallons of cancer-causing toxic waste into the rainforest. Thousands of people have gotten ill. Many have died as a result of this. Chevron lost the case, and then they turned on the United States. By the way, that judgment has been affirmed by 6 appellate courts, 28 appellate judges in Ecuador and Canada, including the Supreme Courts of both countries. But Chevron went to a U.S. trial judge here in New York, where I live, and just began to attack me without a jury. They paid a witness $2 million to come in, and they cooked him for 53 days. And he testified that I bribed the judge in Ecuador, which is completely false. And again, that's been rejected by the courts that have looked at the evidence and really know the case. But this is really just a Chevron attack on using a U.S. federal judge, Lou Kaplan, who's aligned with very pro-corporate forces, the Forest Society, the tobacco industry defense lawyer. And they're trying to blow up the whole judgment such that the Ecuadorians cannot enforce it against Chevron's assets around the world. And they're doing that by attacking me. So these so-called findings of bribery reject completely. They've been rejected by courts all over the world. I I've never been charged with this as a crime. It was just a Chevron civil lawsuit. Again, where I didn't get a jury. Judge Kaplan, who's to me a completely biased fact finder, found or believed this paid Chevron witness with no corroborating evidence. So I reject that completely. I'm happy to base my reputation on, the word of literally thousands of lawyers around the world who support me. 68 Nobel laureates are calling for the dismissal of this case, as well as the judges in Ecuador and Canada, including the Supreme Courts of both countries, who have rejected Judge Kaplan's erroneous findings as to what you just raised.
Right. What has your interaction with mainstream journalists been like as you or people that have been close to you have worked to try to educate reporters, pitch them that, look, this is a massive global story. United States media ought to be covering it. What has been their kind of response back to you?
Well, that's a great question. I would describe it as a little bizarre. I used to be a journalist before I became a lawyer, and I know a lot of journalists, in the United States and particular the New York Times. I and others have pitched this on multiple occasions, and invariably at the reporter level, people are interested. But when something happens at the editor, publisher level, but suddenly the story just doesn't get assigned, to one journalist, it was assigned. He worked on it for 2 weeks, and then he called me up to tell me it was killed. I have no doubt that at higher levels of times, an institutional decision has been made to ignore this story. But, decisions like that are made a lot at various, corporate funded media outlets in the United States. And, I think it would be to assume that just because it's the New York Times is going to cover this story. I mean, I think they are heavily influenced by Chevron, heavily influenced by Chevron's law firm, Gibson, Dunn and Crutcher, where Ted Boutros works. And they have a major conflict of interest. I think the New York Times has had a lot of issues lately with some of its reporting and some of its, institutional challenges. And I think they need to take a good long look at why an American human rights lawyer is being locked up without trial, a 30-minute walk from their newsroom in Manhattan, and they're not covering the story. I mean, this is a major human rights violation in the United States of America. I've said this before to you guys, we cannot let the country start locking up the frontline lawyers who do the work, challenge corporate polluters, like I've done for many, many years. Once that happens, we're in the land of Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Putin's Russia. And we need to maintain the rule of law of this country. And what's happened to me is an outrage. And I think the fact that the big media outlets, it's not just the New York Times, CNN has ignored the story, MSNBC, ABC, CBS, all the networks ignored it as well. But, others have covered it courageously. You guys, The Nation, The Intercept, Chris Hedges on the Sheer Post, have been on a lot of podcasts. I mean, the word has gotten out, which makes the New York Times refusal to cover the story all the more bizarre to me.
And we know that Chevron actually funds some of these outlets because they occasionally have public sponsorships with them in their morning newsletters. And that is, I think, just extremely important insight about your relationships or your conversations with certain media outlets. There's another kind of vivid illustration of what's happened to you. Let's put this tweet up on the screen. Is Google complicit in Chevron's human rights violations against indigenous people in Ecuador? For the second straight day, Google has bought ads to smear you as part of a campaign to criminalize human rights lawyering. That's what you tweeted about, and it is another really good example of how you can sort of see the power coalescing, the corporate power coalescing. Tell us about, break this tweet down a little bit more. Tell us what you saw when you noticed what Google was up to.
Well, Google is, obviously a for-profit business that allows its platform to be sold to the highest bidder. So in my case, when, the truth comes out and it's clear what's happened to me is wrong, and it's clear that what Chevron did in Ecuador is horrendous, horrific, a major human rights violation, they started buying these ads on Google. So whenever you Google my name, the first thing that comes up is a Chevron ad to smear my name. So I'm being attacked by a major corporation using Google's platform. Google's profiting from it. I'll add this, I find very interesting. The Federalist Society, which is the right-wing pro-corporate legal organization that has enormous influence over our federal judiciary. As a matter of fact, the judge who locked me up is a major leader of the Federalist Society. That organization, major donors include Chevron and Google and Gibson, Dunn and Crutcher, which is the Chevron law firm that coached this witness who lied about me for 53 days. So I repeat, the interlocking power structure between the Federalist Society, which has enormous influence over the court, Google, Chevron, Gibson, Dunn and Crutcher, Chevron's main law firm, in funding the Federalist Society is really stunning to me. And people need to understand that profits are being made through this whole process of trying to help Chevron, protect itself from being held accountable for massive pollution in the Amazon that is literally killing off indigenous peoples.
Also, people mix this up all the time, so I'm going to just say the Federalist and the Federalist Society are two very different organizations, just that share a name. So,
right. And just to clear it up, it's Chevron who's buying the ad on Google smearing your name when people search for you. What is next in your case, and what ought the Biden administration be doing about this at this point?
That's a great question. I think this is a major test for the Biden administration on climate. You can't support the Green New Deal. You can't deal effectively with climate if you let our courts with Chevron prosecute the lawyers who do the frontline work. So, we've been asking the Biden administration, in particular, the Biden Department of Justice, Merrick Garland, to exercise its independent judgment and take back this prosecution from the private investment that has Chevron as a client that's prosecuting me. I'll remind people, I'm being charged now with criminal contempt of court by a judge who is mad at me because I refuse to turn over my computer and confidential privileged case information to Chevron. I have appealed the order. The judge charged me, and the charges were rejected by the SDNY, the federal prosecutor here in Manhattan. And he then appointed a private Chevron law firm to prosecute me in the name of the government, billing taxpayers almost $1 million with a misdemeanor prosecution. So Joe Biden, the Biden administration needs to look at this closely and take back the prosecution from the private Chevron law firm so the rule of law can be respected. I'm probably the only lawyer in America right now, probably ever, practically begging the Department of Justice to prosecute me because I need to deal with a professional prosecutor who's not conflicted with the prosecutor Rita Glavin from the law firm Stewart and Kistler, which has Chevron as a client. She's the one who has pushed for me to be locked up all this time. So the Biden administration needs to step up and take this prosecution back from the private Chevron law firm.
So I know you have to run, but lastly, let's just put another tweet from you up on the screen here. Stunned to learn that the main lawyer for the New York Times on press issues is the same lawyer who has billed Chevron millions to attack, demonize, and lock me up. And what's interesting about this entire conversation about Boutros, what's interesting about the conversation about the Federalist Society and the mainstream media outlets obviously lean left. The Federalist Society obviously leans right. And there are a lot of people in the Biden administration, as you're sort of looking forward as to what might happen with your case, have taken money from the same corporate interests as the Federalist Society and as these corporate media outlets. So how do you expect that to play in to the way the Biden Justice Department handles this case going forward?
Well, I hope they handle it not based on politics, but based on law. I mean, the law dictates a private corporation cannot prosecute someone in the United States of America or any rule of law country. So, if they're being lobbied on the other side to resist that, adhere to the law, comply with the law, do the right thing, which is to not let our country go into this land where lawyers can be locked up due to a corporate prosecution. So I think it's critically important they act based on the law. I'll add that people need to call attention to this. And if people can, if I may, we have a website called DonzigerDefense.com. You can join our campaign. I mean, we truly believe only a large public outcry will result in the Department of Justice doing the right thing. And I want to add, last night, Representative Jim McGovern visited me in my home here in New York. I'm chairman of the House Rules Committee, and he organized a letter with Cori Bush and AOC and Jamal Bowman and Rashida Tlaib and Jamie Raskin, written to Merrick Garland 3 or 4 weeks ago demanding action on this case. I want to call people's attention to that. You can get all this information, by the way, on our website, DonzigerDefense.com, or just by following me on Twitter. But we need people engaged. Please, if you want to help, sign up for our campaign. Also, you can give to my defense fund. Fighting this monster called Chevron is enormously expensive, and it's basically bankrupted me and my family. I mean, I haven't worked for 2 years as I've been locked up. And of course, that's part of their strategy as well.
So again, that was DonzigerDefense.com. And we'll have more Rising for you after this.